The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, bouncing off the sun-scorched rocks as Tucker Lawson slumped against his horse, blood seeping through his fingers where they pressed against his side. The year was 1873, and the Arizona Territory had little mercy for men who rode alone, especially men who'd made the enemies he had. Tucker's gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Copper, shifted nervously beneath him as he managed to haul himself back into the saddle. The wound wasn't mortal, but it was bad enough. The bullet had torn through his flesh, leaving a burning trail of pain that made his vision blur. Gritting his teeth, he nudged Copper forward, following the narrow trail that wound through the rocks toward the small settlement of Promise Creek. "Just a little farther, boy," he murmured, patting the horse's neck with a bloodied hand. "Then we can both rest." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Tucker guided his mount down the final slope toward the cluster of buildings that made up the town. Promise Creek wasn't much a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a scattering of homes and businesses, but it had a doctor, and that was what Tucker needed most. He barely made it to the hitching post outside the doctor's office before sliding from the saddle, his legs buckling beneath him as he hit the ground. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was a woman's face, framed by honey-colored hair and the most concerned green eyes he'd ever seen. Violet Fairchild had been closing up her father's medical practice when the wounded man collapsed outside. At 24, she'd seen enough injuries to know this one needed immediate attention. She called for help, and 2 men from the nearby mercantile came running. Together, they carried the unconscious stranger inside and laid him on the examination table. "Papa," Violet called, rushing to the back room where her father was organizing his medicines. "We have an emergency, doctor." James Fairchild hurried into the room, rolling up his sleeves as he assessed the situation. "Gunshot wound," he said grimly, examining the bloody hole in the man's side. "Violet, I need hot water, bandages, and my instruments." While her father worked to save the stranger's life, Violet couldn't help but study him. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the harsh western sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His dark hair was streaked with dust and sweat, and a several days' growth of beard shadowed his jaw. He was handsome in a rugged way, but it was the pain etched across his features that tugged at her heart. "Will he live, Papa?" she asked softly as she handed her father clean bandages. "If infection doesn't set in," Dr. Fairchild replied, his fingers deftly working to extract the bullet. "The bullet missed anything vital, but he's lost a fair amount of blood. He'll need rest and care." Violet nodded, already preparing herself for the long night ahead. Since her mother had died 5 years ago, she had become her father's nurse and assistant, learning the healing arts with a natural aptitude that made the doctor proud. The stranger groaned as the bullet came free, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of a summer sky. For a brief moment, those eyes locked with Violet's before closing again as unconsciousness reclaimed him. "Help me clean and dress the wound," her father instructed, and Violet set to work, her touch gentle but efficient. It was well after midnight when Dr. Fairchild finally retired to his room, leaving Violet to watch over their patient. She sat in a chair beside the bed where they had moved him, a book open in her lap, though her attention remained fixed on the rise and fall of the wounded man's chest. Around dawn, he stirred again, his eyes opening more fully this time. He looked around in confusion before his gaze settled on Violet. "Where am I?" His voice was rough with pain and thirst. "You're in Promise Creek," she answered, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher on the bedside table. "In my father's medical practice, I'm Violet Fairchild." She helped him lift his head to drink, careful not to disturb the bandages wrapping his torso. "Tucker Lawson," he said after swallowing. "I appreciate the help, Miss Fairchild." "It's what we do, Mr. Lawson," she replied with a small smile. "My father removed the bullet. You'll need to rest here for a few days at least." Tucker grimaced, attempting to shift his position and wincing at the pain. "I don't have a few days. There are men looking for me." Violet's eyebrows rose. "Outlaws," a bitter laugh escaped him. "Depends on who you ask. Let's just say I've made some powerful enemies." "Well, those enemies will have to wait. You're in no condition to travel," she said firmly, adjusting his pillow. "And Promise Creek is a peaceful town. Sheriff Wilson keeps it that way." Tucker said nothing more, his eyes drifting shut as exhaustion claimed him once again. Violet watched him for a moment longer, wondering what kind of trouble followed this mysterious cowboy and why the sight of him made her heart beat a little faster. Over the next few days, Tucker slowly regained his strength. He was a difficult patient, always trying to get out of bed before he was ready, but Violet matched his stubbornness with her own. She learned he had been a rancher before the war, had fought for the Union, and now worked as a cattle driver and occasional bounty hunter. What he didn't say was as telling as what he did, and Violet sensed there were shadows in his past he preferred to keep hidden. On the fourth day, he was sitting up in bed when Violet brought him breakfast. She noted with approval that more color had returned to his face. "You're looking better this morning," she commented, setting the tray across his lap. "I feel better," he admitted. "Your father's a good doctor." "And I'm a good nurse," she reminded him with a teasing smile, "though you've been determined to undo our hard work by trying to leave before you're healed." Tucker had the grace to look sheepish. "I've never been good at sitting still, so I've noticed." She sat in the chair beside the bed, watching as he ate with increasing appetite, another good sign. "My father says you can try walking a bit today, but only with assistance." "I'd welcome the company, Miss Fairchild." Later that morning, with Violet's arm supporting him, Tucker took his first halting steps around the small room. His side ached fiercely, but the movement felt good after days confined to bed. Violet's presence beside him was even better, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "Tell me about Promise Creek," he said as they slowly circled the room. "How does a place like this survive out here in the wilderness?" Violet smiled. "We're not as isolated as you might think. The stage comes through once a week and the railroad's only 15 miles south. Most folks here raise cattle or sheep or work the silver mines up in the hills." She paused, helping him turn. "My father came here 10 years ago when the town was just starting. He wanted to build something that would last. And did you always want to be a healer?" "Not always," she admitted. "When I was younger, I dreamed of going east to study literature, but then my mother passed and Papa needed me. I discovered I had a gift for medicine." Her green eyes met his. "I believe we find our true paths when we stop looking for them." Tucker nodded, understanding more than she realized. Sometimes the path finds us whether we want it or not. By the end of the week, Tucker could walk unaided, though he tired quickly. Dr. Fairchild pronounced him well enough to leave the medical practice, but advised against traveling for at least another week. "The Wilsons have a room to let above their store," Violet suggested when Tucker expressed concern about imposing further. "It's modest but clean." "I can't thank you enough," Tucker said, his blue eyes serious as he looked at her. "Both of you, I wouldn't have survived without your care." "It's what we do," Dr. Fairchild replied with a kind smile, echoing his daughter's words from days earlier. "But perhaps you can tell us who put that bullet in you in case they come looking." Tucker hesitated, then sighed. "A man named Harrington, Edmund Harrington. He owns most of the land northeast of here." Violet and her father exchanged glances. Harrington's reputation had reached even their small town, a cattle baron known for ruthless tactics against smaller ranchers who stood in his way. "What quarrel does he have with you?" Dr. Fairchild asked. "I was hired to track down some cattle rustlers who'd been hitting small spreads all through this territory," Tucker explained. "Turned out the thieves were working for Harrington, stealing from the little ranchers so they'd go under and have to sell their land cheap." His expression hardened. "I found proof, but before I could get it to the territorial marshal, Harrington's men caught up with me. I managed to escape with my life, but the evidence was lost." "That's a dangerous enemy to have," Dr. Fairchild observed, "which is why I can't stay long," Tucker replied. "I won't bring trouble to your town." Violet felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. "Promise Creek takes care of its own, Mr. Lawson, and for now, that includes you." Tucker moved into the room above the mercantile that same day. The town was small enough that news of the wounded stranger traveled quickly, and Tucker soon found himself the object of curious glances and whispered conversations. Most folks were friendly enough, especially once word spread that he'd crossed Edmund Harrington. Few had love for the powerful rancher, whose aggressive expansion threatened many local landowners. Violet checked on him daily, ostensibly to change his bandages and monitor his healing, though they both knew he could manage such tasks himself now. Their conversations grew longer, ranging from books they'd read to places they'd seen. Tucker discovered that, beneath her practical exterior, was a woman of profound intelligence and surprising humor. Violet found that the taciturn cowboy possessed a gentle nature at odds with his dangerous profession. One evening, about 2 weeks after Tucker's arrival, Violet invited him to dinner at her home. He arrived with his hat in his hands and his hair slicked back with water, wearing a clean shirt borrowed from the mercantile owner. "This is mighty kind of you," he said as she welcomed him in. The Fairchild home was modest but comfortable, with bookshelves lining the walls and simple, well-made furniture. The smell of roast chicken and fresh bread filled the air, making Tucker's stomach growl appreciatively. "Papa had to ride out to the Peterson farm. Their youngest has the croup," Violet explained as she led him to the dining room. "He sends his apologies." Tucker nodded, secretly relieved. Though he liked the doctor well enough, being alone with Violet made his heart beat faster in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "I hope you don't mind it being just the two of us," she added, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Not at all," he assured her with a smile. Over dinner, Tucker found himself telling Violet stories he'd never shared with anyone about his childhood on a small farm in Missouri. His dreams of having his own ranch someday, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war that had changed him forever. "I came west to start fresh," he explained, pushing his empty plate aside, "but it seems trouble follows me wherever I go." Violet studied him across the table, her green eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps you're drawn to it," she suggested gently. "You could have settled down, but instead you chose a life hunting dangerous men." Tucker considered her words. "Maybe you're right. After everything I saw in the war, peace felt undeserved somehow." "Everyone deserves peace, Tucker," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. The intimacy of the moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Tucker found himself leaning toward her, drawn by something he couldn't resist. Violet didn't pull away. The front door opened with a bang, startling them both. "Doctor." Fairchild entered, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Little Sarah Peterson will live to see morning," he announced, hanging his hat on the hook by the door. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Tucker. "Evening, Lawson. I trust my daughter has been taking good care of you." "The best of care, sir," Tucker replied, leaning back in his chair, the moment broken but not forgotten. As spring turned to early summer, Tucker's wound healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar as a reminder. He took odd jobs around Promise Creek, helping at the livery stable, mending fences for local ranchers, even serving as a deputy when Sheriff Wilson came down with a bad case of influenza. The work kept him busy during the day, but his evenings increasingly belonged to Violet. They walked together through the town and along the creek that gave it its name. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they enjoyed comfortable silence. Occasionally, Dr. Fairchild would join them, but more often he gave them space, watching with knowing eyes as his daughter bloomed under the cowboy's attention. One warm evening, as they sat on a fallen log beside the creek, Tucker finally gave voice to what had been on his mind. "I should be moving on soon," he said, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. Violet's hands stilled in the act of braiding a crown from wildflowers. "Because of Harrington?" "Partly," he admitted, "but also because—" He hesitated, searching for words. "I've never stayed anywhere this long since the war. I'm not sure I remember how." Violet set aside her flowers and turned to face him fully. "Is that the only reason?" Tucker met her gaze, finding courage in her steady eyes. "No, there's also the matter of how I feel about you." "And how is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I've found something I didn't even know I was searching for." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "But I'm not the kind of man who can offer a woman like you the life you deserve. I have enemies. I have nightmares that wake me in a cold sweat. I haven't even set foot in a church since Shiloh." Violet's free hand came up to touch his face. "Did it ever occur to you that I might be strong enough to face those things with you, that perhaps what I deserve is to choose my own path?" Before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was hesitant at first, then grew deeper as Tucker pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist as if she might disappear if he didn't hold on. When they finally parted, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to bring danger to your door." "It's my door too," she said firmly, "and some things are worth the risk." Their courtship progressed swiftly after that night, with Tucker spending most evenings at the Fairchild home. Dr. Fairchild, after a frank conversation with Tucker about his intentions, gave his blessing, pleased to see his daughter so happy and impressed with the cowboy's honesty about his troubled past. Tucker found work as the town's permanent deputy, a position that suited his skills and allowed him to put down roots without abandoning the sense of purpose he'd found in bringing wrongdoers to justice. For the first time since before the war, he began to imagine a future, a home, children, growing old beside a woman he loved more with each passing day. But the shadow of Edmund Harrington still loomed. Tucker knew the cattle baron wouldn't forget or forgive, and the longer he stayed in one place, the greater the risk that Harrington's men would find him. He confided this fear to Sheriff Wilson, who promised to keep watch for strangers and sent word to neighboring towns to be alert. Summer was drawing to a close when Tucker finally worked up the courage to ask Dr. Fairchild for Violet's hand in marriage. The doctor smiled, clasping Tucker's shoulder warmly. "She'll say yes," he assured the nervous cowboy. "She's been in love with you since you bled all over her best dress the day you arrived." That evening, Tucker took Violet to their favorite spot by the creek, where the water flowed over smooth stones and cottonwood leaves rustled in the breeze. He'd picked wildflowers not as expertly as she would have, but with genuine effort, and had a small box in his pocket containing a modest ring purchased from a traveling jeweler. "Violet," he began, taking both her hands in his as they stood beneath a towering cottonwood. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me that there's more to living than just surviving." She smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light. "You've done the same for me. This town was my whole world before you came. Now I see how much more there is to experience, as long as we're together." Tucker took a deep breath and dropped to one knee, fumbling in his pocket for the ring. "Violet Fairchild, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my—" A gunshot cracked through the peaceful evening, the bullet splintering the bark of the tree just inches from Tucker's head. He reacted instantly, pulling Violet down and shielding her with his body as more shots followed. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver from its holster. He fired twice toward the source of the shots, then dragged Violet behind the thick trunk of the cottonwood. "Lawson," a voice called from the gathering shadows. "Harrington sends his regards." Tucker's jaw tightened. "3 men, maybe 4, he whispered to Violet, whose face had gone pale but remained remarkably composed. "When I give the word, run back toward town. Don't stop for anything. I'm not leaving you," she hissed back. "This isn't a discussion," he insisted. "I can handle myself better if I'm not worrying about you." "Come on out, Lawson," the voice called again. "We just want to talk," Tucker snorted. "That'd be a first for Harrington's boys." He peered carefully around the tree, trying to locate their attackers in the growing darkness. He spotted movement about 30 yards away, near a cluster of boulders. Taking careful aim, he fired and was rewarded with a cry of pain. The answering volley of bullets tore chunks from the cottonwood. "Go now," Tucker urged Violet, giving her a gentle push. "Run straight for the sheriff's office." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, gathering her skirts and darting from their cover toward the path leading to town. Tucker provided covering fire, emptying his revolver at the boulders where Harrington's men were concealed. He was reaching for spare ammunition when he heard Violet scream. Hard in his throat, he risked a glance around the tree to see a large man grabbing her, a knife pressed to her throat. "Drop the gun, Lawson," the man called, "or the lady gets it." Cold fury washed through Tucker as he stepped out from behind the tree, his hands raised, revolver dangling from one finger. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between me and Harrington." "Oh, I don't think so," the man replied, his ugly face split by a grin. "The boss wants you to suffer before you die. Killing your woman seems like a good start." Before the man could carry out his threat, Violet drove her elbow hard into his stomach, then stomped on his instep with all her strength. The man howled, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. Tucker didn't hesitate. He tossed his revolver aside and charged, tackling the man before he could recover. They went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the ground as Tucker fought to keep the knife away from his throat. The man was bigger and stronger, using his weight advantage to pin Tucker beneath him. The knife inched closer, the tip pricking Tucker's skin. Suddenly, a rock smashed into the side of the attacker's head, sending him sprawling. Violet stood over them, another rock ready in her hand, her face a mask of determination. Tucker scrambled to his feet, grabbing the knife that had fallen in the struggle. The other men were approaching now, drawn by the commotion. 3 of them, all armed, spread out to surround Tucker and Violet. "Run," Tucker told her again, positioning himself between her and the approaching gunmen. "Not without you," she replied, standing firmly at his side. The standoff was broken by the sound of multiple horses approaching at a gallop. Sheriff Wilson's voice rang out, "Drop your weapons." "You're surrounded," the sheriff and several townsmen had formed a posse, alerted by the gunshots. Harrington's men, finding themselves outnumbered, surrendered with minimal resistance. As they were being disarmed and bound, Tucker turned to Violet, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands gentle as they cupped her face. "No," she assured him, leaning into his touch. "Are you?" He shook his head, overwhelmed by relief and love. "You saved my life." "We saved each other," she corrected with a smile. "I believe that's how marriage is supposed to work." Tucker blinked, then laughed. "I never did finish asking, did I?" From his pocket, miraculously intact, he withdrew the small box and once again dropped to one knee before her. "Violet Fairchild, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. 1,000 times yes. The weeks following the attack were tense but productive. Sheriff Wilson and the territorial marshal used the testimony of the captured men to build a case against Edmund Harrington. With the promise of reduced sentences, 2 of the gunmen turned on their employer, revealing details of not just the attempt on Tucker's life but numerous other crimes committed at Harrington's behest. While the legal machinery turned, Tucker and Violet planned their wedding. The entire town of Promise Creek embraced the celebration, viewing it as a triumph over the shadow Harrington had cast over the region for too long. The mercantile owner donated fabric for Violet's dress, the baker offered his finest cake, and even the saloon proprietor contributed his best whiskey for the reception. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect early autumn morning. The small church at the edge of town had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and every seat was filled as Tucker stood at the altar, dressed in a new suit and looking more nervous than he had facing down Harrington's gunmen. Sheriff Wilson stood beside him as best man, offering quiet encouragement as they waited for the bride. When the door opened and Violet appeared on her father's arm, Tucker's breath caught in his throat. She was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, her honey-colored hair crowned with flowers, her green eyes shining with happiness as they found his. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Tucker's voice rang clear and true as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Violet for all the days of his life. Her response was equally fervent, bringing tears to the eyes of many in attendance. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, food and drink flowing freely as the town rejoiced with the newlyweds. As the evening drew to a close, Tucker and Violet slipped away to the small house. They had purchased a cozy structure not far from the doctor's home, with room for a garden and perhaps, someday, children. Their first night as husband and wife was everything they had dreamed of, tender and passionate, a perfect union of 2 souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window, Violet traced the scar on Tucker's side where the bullet had entered all those months ago. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been shot that day?" she asked softly. Tucker captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I'd have ridden right through Promise Creek without stopping, never would have known what I was missing." He smiled against her fingers. "Maybe getting shot was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." Life settled into a rhythm for the newlyweds. Tucker continued as deputy while also starting a small horse breeding operation on their property. Violet divided her time between assisting her father and making their house a home, planting the garden she had dreamed of and filling the rooms with warmth and beauty. News came in late autumn that Edmund Harrington had been indicted on multiple charges, including attempted murder, conspiracy, cattle rustling, and land fraud. The trial was set for spring in the territorial capital, and both Tucker and Violet would be called to testify. The prospect of facing Harrington weighed heavily on Tucker. Despite his happiness, nightmares began to plague him again, visions of Harrington's men hurting Violet, burning their home, destroying everything they had built together. One night, after waking in a cold sweat from such a dream, Tucker slipped out of bed and went to sit on the front porch. The winter air was crisp and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear Violet approach until she draped a blanket over his shoulders and sat beside him. "Want to tell me about it?" she asked, nestling against his side. Tucker sighed, pulling her closer for warmth. "Same dream. Harrington's men coming for you while I can't reach you." Violet was silent for a moment, her hand finding his. "These dreams started when you heard about the trial." It wasn't a question, but Tucker nodded anyway. "I thought putting him behind bars would end this, but now I'm not so sure. He has money, connections. What if he gets acquitted? What if he comes after us again? Then we'll face it together," Violet said simply. "But Tucker, you can't live your life in fear of what might happen. That's not living at all." He knew she was right, but the fear had sunk its hooks deep. "I haven't been afraid for myself in a long time," he admitted. "But being afraid for you, it's different, worse." Violet shifted to look into his eyes. "Do you remember what you told me when we first started courting, about not having set foot in a church since Shiloh?" Tucker nodded, wondering where she was going with this. "You lost your faith in the war," she continued gently. "Not just in God, but in the idea that good things can last, that you deserve them." She cupped his cheek. "But Tucker, faith isn't just about church. It's about believing in something bigger than your fears." Her words struck a chord deep within him. It was true somewhere in the blood-soaked fields of Tennessee. He had stopped believing in anything but survival. Even his work as a bounty hunter had been more about justice than faith, concrete actions to balance the scales rather than trust in a higher purpose. "I don't know how to get it back," he confessed. "I don't even know how to pray anymore." Violet took both his hands in hers, folding them together as if in prayer, and covered them with her own. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to Tucker's eyes. "You don't have to know the words," she whispered. "Just open your heart and trust that you're heard." That's all prayer really is, reaching out in faith that someone is reaching back. In that moment, with Violet's hands warming his, Tucker felt something shift inside him. Not a sudden return of lost faith, but the first stirring of possibility that perhaps he could learn to trust again, not just in Violet and their love, but in something greater that had guided him to her. "I'll try," he promised, and meant it. Winter deepened, bringing snow to Promise Creek and quiet evenings by the fire for Tucker and Violet. As Christmas approached, the town buzzed with preparations for the holiday. Tucker found himself caught up in the excitement despite his lingering concerns about Harrington and the upcoming trial. On Christmas Eve, they attended a special service at the church. Tucker hesitated at the entrance, his hand tightening on Violet's. "You don't have to," she assured him. "We can go home if you'd prefer." He shook his head. "No, I want to try for both of us." Inside, the church was transformed by candlelight and evergreen boughs. The familiar carols and readings washed over Tucker like a balm, soothing places within him that had been raw for years. When the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, he felt Violet's hands fold around his again, just as they had that night on the porch. This time, words came to him, not the formal prayers of his youth, but simple thoughts of gratitude for Violet, for their home, for the second chance he'd been given. He asked for strength to face whatever came and for protection for those he loved. It wasn't eloquent, but it was sincere, and as he raised his head at the prayer's end, he felt lighter than he had in years. Violet noticed the change in him as they walked home through the gently falling snow. "You seem different," she observed, her arm linked through his. "I feel different," he acknowledged. "Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying too long." She smiled up at him, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "That's what faith does. It doesn't solve your problems, but it helps you carry them." Tucker stopped in the middle of the street, drawing her into his arms for a kiss that expressed everything he couldn't put into words. When they parted, Breathless and laughing, he knew with sudden clarity that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Spring brought thawing earth, new growth, and the date of Harrington's trial. Tucker and Violet traveled to the territorial capital, a journey of several days that took them further from Promise Creek than Violet had ever been. Despite the serious nature of their trip, she couldn't help but be excited by the new sights and experiences. The city was larger and busier than anything she had imagined, with brick buildings several stories tall, paved streets, and more people than she had ever seen in one place. Tucker, more familiar with such surroundings, kept a protective arm around her as they navigated to the modest hotel where they would stay during the proceedings. The trial began the following day, with Tucker among the first witnesses called. He testified clearly and calmly about the cattle-rustling operation he had uncovered, the evidence he had gathered linking it to Harrington, and the subsequent attempts on his life. Violet watched from the gallery, her heart swelling with pride at her husband's dignity and courage. When it was Violet's turn to testify about the attack at the creek, she too spoke with composure, her medical training allowing her to provide precise details that strengthened the prosecution's case. Harrington, a large man with cold eyes and an expensive suit, watched her with undisguised contempt. The trial lasted 2 weeks, with numerous witnesses painting a damning picture of Harrington's criminal enterprise. The defense tried to discredit Tucker's character, bringing up his bounty-hunting past, and suggesting he had a personal vendetta against Harrington, but the evidence was too overwhelming. On the day the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed. Tucker and Violet sat together, hands clasped tightly as the foreman stood. On all counts, we find the defendant, Edmund Harrington, guilty as charged. A murmur ran through the courtroom, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Harrington's face darkened with fury as the judge sentenced him to 15 years in the territorial prison, effectively ending his reign of terror over the region. As they left the courthouse, Tucker pulled Violet into a tight embrace. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "Really over." She nodded against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. "Let's go home." The journey back to Promise Creek had a different quality than their outward trip, a sense of closure and new beginnings. They took their time, stopping to admire views that they had passed quickly before, enjoying each other's company without the shadow of the trial looming over them. "I've been thinking," Tucker said one evening as they camped beside a clear stream, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. "About our future." Violet looked up from the small fire she was tending. "What about it? The horse breeding is going well. In a few years we could have a real ranch." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I'm wondering if that's enough for you." "You talked once about studying literature in the East." Violet smiled, moving to sit beside him. "That was a girl's dream. The woman I am now has different ones." "Like what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "A home filled with laughter, children, using my healing skills to help others. Building something lasting with the man I love." She took his hand. "But there is one thing I've been wanting to tell you." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Violet guided his hand to rest on her stomach, still flat beneath her dress. "Our family may be starting sooner than we planned." For a moment, Tucker stared at her in disbelief, then a smile of pure joy spread across his face. "A baby, you're sure?" She nodded, her own smile radiant. "Papa confirmed it before we left for the trial. I wanted to wait until after the verdict to tell you so nothing would distract from the case." Tucker pulled her into his lap, cradling her against him as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "A father," he marveled. "I'm going to be a father." "You'll be wonderful at it," Violet assured him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I hope so," he said softly. "I want our child to grow up feeling safe and loved, to know their parents are always there for them." He placed his hand over hers where it rested on her stomach. "And I want them to have faith not just in God, but in themselves and the goodness of life. The faith I lost and you helped me find again. Then that's what we'll give them," Violet promised. Together, they returned to Promise Creek to a hero's welcome. News of Harrington's conviction had preceded them, and the town turned out to celebrate both the verdict and the couple's safe return. When Tucker and Violet shared their news about the baby, the celebration grew even more joyous. The months that followed were busy ones. Tucker's horse breeding business flourished, allowing him to purchase additional land and expand their small homestead into a proper ranch. He continued his deputy duties, but began training a replacement. Planning to focus entirely on the ranch by the time the baby arrived, Violet's pregnancy progressed without complications, her natural vitality only enhanced by her condition. She glowed with health and happiness, dividing her time between helping her father, preparing for the baby, and supporting Tucker in his growing business. Together, they built a nursery adjoining their bedroom, Tucker crafting a cradle from cottonwood while Violet sewed tiny garments and soft blankets. As autumn approached once again, marking a year since their wedding, the changes in their lives were evident everywhere in the expanded ranch house, in Violet's rounded figure, in Tucker's ease with both himself and others. He had become a respected member of the community, known for his fairness and integrity as much as for his skill with horses. Most profound, however, was the change in Tucker's spirit. The restlessness that had driven him for so long had given way to a deep contentment. He still carried the memories of the war and the hardships that had followed, but they no longer defined him. Instead, his life was shaped by love for Violet, for their coming child, for the home and community they had built together. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson, Violet felt the baby move strongly within her. "Someone's active tonight," she said with a laugh, guiding Tucker's hand to feel the kicks. His face lit with wonder, as it did every time he felt their child move. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" "A girl," Violet said confidently. "With your blue eyes and stubborn chin." Tucker chuckled. "God help us if she has my stubbornness and your determination. She'll rule the territory by age 10. "And what would be wrong with that?" Violet teased, leaning against him. "The territory could use more strong women." "Nothing at all," he agreed, kissing the top of her head, "as long as she has your heart as well." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and stars began to appear. Tucker's arm around Violet's shoulders, their child stirring between them, a perfect moment of peace that neither could have imagined when he'd ridden into Promise Creek, wounded and alone, just over a year before. "You know what today is?" Violet asked softly. Tucker smiled. "1 year since I asked you to marry me and nearly got us both killed in the process." "Worth every moment of danger," she assured him, turning to meet his eyes. "I wouldn't change a thing about our story." "Nor would I," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my life, Violet, my faith, my future." He placed his hand over her heart. "Everything I am now began the day you folded my hands in yours and taught me to pray again. And everything I am became possible when you rode into town and reminded me that there's a whole world beyond Promise Creek," she replied. "We saved each other, remember?" As darkness settled fully around them, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their hopes and plans. The baby would arrive in late autumn. Tucker's horse business was expanding. Dr. Fairchild was considering taking on an apprentice to help with his practice, allowing Violet more time with her family while still using her healing skills when needed. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant rumble of thunder, announcing an approaching storm. "We should go in," Tucker said, helping Violet to her feet. As they turned toward the door, the first heavy drops began to fall, quickly becoming a steady downpour that drummed on the roof and washed the world clean. Inside, Tucker built up the fire while Violet prepared a pot of tea, the familiar domestic ritual comforting as the storm raged outside. Later, as they lay in bed listening to the rain, Violet nestled against Tucker's side, his hand resting protectively over their unborn child. In the peaceful rhythm of their breathing, in the security of their embrace, was everything they had ever sought, the answered prayer of two hearts that had found in each other their perfect home. "I love you, Tucker Lawson," Violet whispered in the darkness. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." "And I love you, Violet Lawson," he replied, his lips brushing her forehead. "More than I have words to say." Their daughter, Faith Lawson, was born on a clear November morning as the first light of dawn gilded the mountains surrounding Promise Creek. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, entering the world with a lusty cry that announced her arrival to all within hearing distance. Tucker, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom door throughout Violet's labor, was the first person besides the doctor and midwife to hold his daughter. As he cradled the tiny bundle in his arms, looking down at the perfect miniature features of the new life he and Violet had created, he felt a sense of purpose and belonging more profound than anything he had ever known. "She's beautiful," he whispered, bringing the baby to Violet's side. Just like her mother, Violet, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch their daughter's downy head. "Hello, Faith," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." In the days and weeks that followed, Tucker and Violet adjusted to life with their new addition. Faith proved to be a good-natured baby, with a hearty appetite and a fascination with the world around her. Tucker was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Faith to Violet for feeding, walking the floor with her when she was fussy, singing the old trail songs from his cattle driving days that seemed to soothe her better than any lullaby. As winter settled over Promise Creek, the Lawson home was a haven of warmth and happiness. Dr. Fairchild visited often, delighting in his role as grandfather. Friends from town brought gifts and good wishes, and even the most hard-bitten cowboys from neighboring ranches found excuses to stop by, awkwardly offering handmade toys and small treasures for the baby who had captured everyone's hearts. When Faith was baptized in the church just before Christmas, Tucker stood proudly beside Violet, his voice clear and confident as he joined in the prayers. The congregation, many of whom remembered his reluctance to enter the church just a year earlier, nodded approvingly as he recited the responses, his daughter cradled securely in his arms. Afterward, as they greeted well-wishers outside the church, Sheriff Wilson clapped Tucker on the shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said with a grin. "Tucker Lawson, family man and churchgoer," Tucker laughed, shifting Faith to his other arm. "Life has a way of surprising you." "That it does," the sheriff agreed, his expression growing more serious. "Got news you might want to hear. Harrington died in prison last week. Pneumonia, they say." Tucker absorbed this information silently. Once the news would have brought satisfaction, perhaps even joy. Now it evoked only a distant sense of closure. "May he rest in peace," he said finally, and meant it. The sheriff nodded, understanding the change in the man before him. "You've built something good here, Tucker, something that'll last." As they walked home through the snow, Faith bundled snugly against the cold, Tucker reflected on the sheriff's words. He had indeed built something lasting, not just the ranch with its growing herd of fine horses, or the comfortable home with its rooms ready to welcome more children in the years to come, but a life founded on love and faith, on second chances and forgiveness. That evening, as he and Violet sat before the fire with Faith sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, Tucker reached for Violet's hand, folding it between both of his in an echo of that night on the porch when she had taught him to pray again. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "For what?" she asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "For saving my life, for loving me, for our daughter, for everything." He brought her hand to his lips. "For showing me that even a lost soul can find his way home if the right person lights the path." Violet leaned forward to kiss him, a tender gesture full of promise. "We found the path together," she reminded him, "and we'll walk it together wherever it leads." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Promise Creek in pristine white. Inside the Lawson home, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the walls as the family father, mother, daughter enjoyed the peace they had found together. Tucker's arms encircled Violet as she rested against his chest, both of them watching the sleeping face of their child, their greatest blessing and brightest hope. In that perfect moment, Tucker Lawson, once a wounded soldier, a restless wanderer, a man who had forgotten how to pray, knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found his true purpose. Not in the pursuit of justice or the righting of wrongs, but in the love of the woman who had healed more than his physical wounds and the child who represented their shared future. The path ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges to face, hardships to overcome. But they would face them together, their hands folded in mutual strength and faith, their hearts beating as one in the rhythm of a love that had transformed them both. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, As Promise Creek developed from a small settlement into a thriving town, Tucker and Violet Lawson remained at its heart a living testament to the power of second chances, the healing force of love, and the enduring strength of faith rediscovered in the most unexpected of ways.